Welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be in chapter 14, which deals with measuring attitudes. Now, if you remember back a few weeks ago, we talked about this idea of constructs. Constructs are things that you can see, but it's really hard to measure because of the nature of what it is. Love, happiness, sadness, depression. These things are constructs. They can be seen as far as the results of them, but it's hard to be able to put into numerical value what they are. Attitudes are another area that we consider to be constructs. It's very important in business to understand the principles of it and to also try to assess the degree of attitudes that are being expressed in your workplace or in your ministry. So today, let's go ahead and start with chapter 14, which talks about measuring attitudes. Well, welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to be in chapter 14, which deals with attitude measurement. Now, attitude, if you remember us talking about constructs, I believe it was last time, chapter 12 or 13, a construct is something that we can experience, but we really can't quantify. It's elusive, and it's kind of one of those things where we can approximate its impact, but we really don't have anything tangible by which we can measure it quantifiably. So when it comes to attitudes, it's a very important concept in business, but it can be elusive. But to give you an idea of the importance of attitude, there was a research team who wanted to study the morale and attitudes of workers in a particular company. And they first questioned and interviewed the management. And management said everybody's happy here, everything is going well. And when they talked to the employees, they got a different response. The employees were fed up, and many of them were wanting to form a union because they were dissatisfied. They had a horrible attitude towards work and management. So it's important for us not just to measure productivity in the workplace or in your church, but also measure the attitudes. One more example. As a pastor, I had decided, to try to build up our children's program with our children's director, and I'm a free reign type of pastor. I give them the resources, but I don't micromanage. And I met with my children's director about a week ago and just asked her how everything was going, and she had been discouraged, and her attitude had started to wane. And, I gave her encouragement, and we talked, and it seemed to make things better. So don't underestimate the power of attitude in your organization, whether it's church or whether it's in business. Attitudes are important, and that's going to be the focus of our material today. Now, your textbook talks about this little smoke and heat type thing where steel workers work in a very dangerous environment, but just as important as safety and health, what the people there found, business researchers found, was that the relationships that these people had with their supervisor and their management personnel really made the difference in them staying and being productive and so forth. So again, this is just one of many examples that give way to us really placing an emphasis on attitudes. Now, what is an attitude? Well, when we talk about attitude, what we're looking at here is the realm of social science, specifically psychology. Psychology deals with the brain and our thinking and our emotions and so forth, and how it ties into our behavior. And much research has been done on attitudes. Attitudes can change. So what may be right now may not be that way in a week or two. But if attitudes, especially negative attitudes, are allowed to fester, it can be a problem, and they can be persistent in the workplace or in ministry. But an attitude is an enduring disposition to consistently respond in a given manner to various aspects of the world. What is your attitude today towards maybe, let's say, commercialism? We have a materialistic world today, and in business, commerce is the key. But what's your attitude towards the amount of material things that the world wants? What's your attitude towards the lost? What's your attitude towards false religions? What's your attitude towards big corporations? You know, that's a big issue in the world of politics now. So attitudes are kind of an enduring disposition. But again, an attitude can change, so always remember that. Now, some of the components of attitudes we see here, there's the affective component. Now, the affect deals with emotions. What are the emotions towards an object? When you see debates about different issues, abortion, big corporate entities, and so forth, people can be emotional over those things. So there's that affective component. The cognitive component deals with the knowledge and beliefs about an object. You know, most people who form attitudes really don't know a whole lot about what they're talking about. Many people are led so much by their emotions that they really don't stop and challenge or think about what's being said and being propagated. Behavioral component. Well, these are the actions that emerge from the emotions and the cognition, and from that you're going to have people who will engage in behaviors. If you are sick of government, you may run for government office. If you are against some of the social issues that we're engaged in today, you may decide to protest or whatever. You may have to deal with workers who have a bad attitude, and their behaviors reflect that in as much as they are absent or don't work, or there's a lot of turnover. So that may prompt behaviors in response to their behaviors and so forth. So these are really the dimensions of attitude and what an attitude actually is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, attitudes are hypothetical constructs, and you see here the definition. These are variables that are not directly observable, and this is an important term here, directly observable, but are measurable through indirect indicators such as verbal expression or overt behavior. These also are known as latent constructs or simply constructs. So we talked about that again, like I said, in the past. A person can say, I'm happy or I'm fine, but just their facial expression can really give away something other than them being fine. So some of the things that involve a common construct would be job satisfaction. Now, you can't see job satisfaction. It's a construct. But what would be a way that you could know that there is an issue with job satisfaction? Well, again, if people are showing up late for work, if their productivity is off, these are indirect indicators of the overall issue of job satisfaction. Organizational commitment. Again, how engaged are they in the organization? Personal values, feelings, role stress. All of these examples are what we call just common constructs. You can't see it directly, so you have to be able to identify it through indirect indicators. Now, how do you measure attitudes? Well, you've probably over time and with different issues or environments, you've probably had to take measurements of attitudes. You might not have been the one giving the measurement, but you might have had to respond to these techniques. One of the techniques involves ranking, and that's requiring the person to rank order objects and overall performance on the basis of a characteristic or stimulus. Rank your approval of so-and-so's performance compared to 3 or 4 other employees. So out of, let's say, 4 employees, you would rank Jim number 1, Mary number 2, Frank number 3, Sarah number 4. So you are ranking them in order. Rating is asking the respondent to estimate the magnitude of a characteristic or quality that an object possesses by indicating on a scale whether he or she would rate an object. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your satisfaction at this restaurant? That would be an example of maybe rating. Now, sorting. Sorting is just presenting the respondent with several concepts typed on cards and requiring the respondent to arrange the cards in a number of piles or otherwise classify the concepts. Now, the textbook gives an example of this where you have different airlines, and they would ask you to put cards in a pocket on their satisfaction with the different airlines. So that would be sorting. You're sorting out these responses. Choice is asking a respondent to choose one alternative from among several alternatives. It's assumed that the chosen alternative is preferred over the others. And we see that a lot of times when it comes to, well, there was a big competition between Coke and Pepsi Cola, and they would ask the person, which one would you choose? Now that's one or the other type of setup, but you could say, let's say from toothpaste, what would you prefer? Crest, Colgate, the different others that may be out there, which one would you choose from among different alternatives? And here is a example again of a hypothetical construct, and that's love. One study found that there are 9 different ways love can be defined or measured. And we even see in the Bible different ways that love is expressed. We see the greatest love as being agape love, but we also have eros, and we have sturge, and we have phileo, just different types of love that can be identified. But it's a construct. It does not exist as a physical entity. So how do you measure love? Especially as an enduring construct or an emotion. There are people all over the world who get married because they're in love, but yet they divorce because they say they fall out of love. So how do you really tangibly and effectively measure something like love? Some people express love physically by hugging or holding hands. Some people express love by doing for others. They may not be able to express it by holding hands or hugging. Some people are just not that, they're just not geared for that. But they may do things for another person as a demonstration of love. Other people may just communicate how they feel, and that's an expression of love. So you see the complexity and how intricate measuring some of these constructs can be. And this is especially true when it comes to medicine. One of the issues that many people have today, including myself, is this idea of depression and some of the what we call cognitive or emotional issues that people are dealing with. How do you measure depression? How do you measure happiness? If you are depressed, how can they quantify that especially when it comes to administering medicine and so forth to a person. So we have to be careful within these social sciences that science is not overstepping its bounds and getting into areas that really cannot be measured. And if you can't measure it or really identify, how can you treat it? Now here you have an attitude rating scale. And the example is the president should run for re-election. Agree, disagree. You have one of two choices to make. So that's not very difficult. It requires that an individual agree or disagree with a statement or respond to a single question, and usually yes, no, agree, disagree, and so forth. And then students ask, are you responsible? And this is just a little way that they're studying some of the issues that show interest in the world. A survey of college students shows they prefer products and services from companies they perceive as having a social role. So their attitude towards social responsibility is very important. Now that's very important also in business, because if they want to do business with companies who are socially responsible, the more you advertise your responsibility towards society, the more likely you are going to be successful with your consumers. Now, an attitude rating scale. Again, this is kind of the same as we saw earlier, but it gives you some more options. A category scale is a more sensitive measure than a simple scale, in that you can have more than two response categories. So, for an example, how important were the following in your decision to visit San Diego? And here you rate what's most important. Let's say family-oriented would be really very important to you. So you might put 1 here, or you may check here. And then climate, not too important. Cost of travel, for me that would be very important. Educational or historic, somewhat important. Familiarity with the area may be somewhat important. And here you can get an idea of what's important to that individual or families or whatever in their consideration of making this trip. And people can use that data to be able to tailor or fashion a marketing plan or a sales pitch to be able to get people to come to San Diego. Here is a Likert scale in which you are looking at interacting with physician staff. My doctor's office staff takes a warm and personal interest in me. And on a Likert scale, you have approve or agree, disagree, somewhat agree, neutral, and so forth. So a Likert scale is just a little bit more in depth than the attitude rating scales or the category scale. So Likert comes from a guy named Rensis Likert. His scale was developed so that you didn't have to choose either or. You could rate your response based on a broad scale. Again, you go strongly disagree, disagree, and so forth on that. And here's an example of that. It's more fun to play a tough competitive tennis match than to play an easy one. And then you have here from these examples, strongly agree, agree, not sure, disagree, or strongly disagree. So here you can pinpoint more accurately what the person truly feels about whatever it is you're asking. Now, semantic differential, it's a series of 7-point rating scales with bipolar adjectives such as good, bad, anchoring the ends or poles of the scale. So what they mean by polar or bipolar is that here's the extreme on one end, exciting. Here's the extreme on the other end, calm, passive, active. And you can rate or position your numbers accordingly on this scale. A numerical scale, that they have numbers as response options rather than semantic space or verbal descriptions to identify categories. So here you're looking at pretty much the same thing, but instead of somewhat or very much disagree, somewhat disagree, agree, or whatever, you just rate the experience or your measurement by numbers. So if you were middle of the road, yeah, it was okay. I'm middle of the road, then I might circle 4, and that would indicate to the people who were doing the study that he neither liked it nor disliked it. And this is a fairly easy one. You see this one in the hospital a lot of times, especially when it comes to pain. You have very poor, middle of the road, very good, and then they have at the hospital, if you've ever seen one on the wall, it'll have different faces with more expressions on it, going from extreme pain to no pain at all or happy or whatever. Now, measuring behavioral issues, the behavioral expectation of an individual, you're looking at their attitude towards that. What are you going to do with this object that we're discussing? For example, here they show you, how likely is it that you will purchase a Honda? I definitely will buy, probably might buy, probably not, definitely will not. So it's again the same type of thing that you're looking at here, but it's positioned in a different way so that you can read the responses and have a more detailed or more finite response to that. Now, measuring behavioral issues, again, you have behavioral differential, and here at the bottom you see a 25-year-old woman sales representative would or would not ask this person for advice. So again, you're just looking at polar opposites, would not, and then you just rate it and your intentions toward this object would be scaled. In an ordinal scale, you can develop that by asking respondents to rank order from most preferred to least preferred. A set of objects or attributes. You can pair responses and compare them. You can sort out, as we saw earlier. You can use sorting for this. And then a paired comparison. As you see here, it's a measurement technique that involves presenting the respondents with 2 objects and asking the respondents to pick the preferred object. More than 2 objects may be presented, but comparisons are made, as I said earlier, in pairs. And the number of comparisons, you have the number multiplied by the number minus 1 divided by 2, and that'll give you the result after that. And then sorting, as I said earlier, here's the example at the bottom where we see American Airlines, Delta, United, Southwest, Northwest, their cards that you just put in a little pocket for those that you would use on your next trip, and they just count the cards in each. Now, when you're selecting a measurement scale, very simply, these are some of the questions that you want to ask. Which one should you use? which one is going to be best? Should a monadic or a comparative scale be used? And then we'll talk about that here in a minute. What type of category labels, if any, will be used for the rating scale? How many scale categories or response positions are needed to accurately measure an attitude? Should a balanced or unbalanced rating scale be chosen? Should an even or odd number of response categories be provided? Should a scale that forces a choice among predetermined options be used? And finally, should a single measure or an index measure be used? A single measure looks at one indices, which means one issue or one object or one unit. An index is a collection of different items. When you want to take a look at college entrance exams, the index for college entrance exams may be the quality of these tests, our success of these tests. You may have as an index family background, you may have economic status, you may have geographic location. Instead of looking at each one separately as far as the effectiveness of these exams, you can combine all of these as an index and get an accurate assessment of those forces as it applies to college entrance exams, maybe. A monadic rating scale asks about a single concept in isolation, and the respondent is not given a specific frame of reference. So here, now that your automobile is a year old, please tell us how satisfied you are with the engine power and pickup. You're not looking at gas mileage, you're not looking at looks or anything like that. They are defining the question, and you're limited to those issues that they're asking. A comparative rating scale will ask the respondent to rate a concept in comparison with a benchmark, and it's explicitly used as a frame of reference. So here the example would be, please indicate how the amount of authority in your present position compares with the amount of authority that would be ideal for this position. And again, you're looking at a scale, rating scale. It's very simple and straightforward, but that's where it would come into play. A balanced rating scale. It's a fixed alternative rating scale with an equal number of positive and negative categories. It's a neutral point or point of indifference as a center of the scale. So what makes it different is that neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. Now here's the thing about it. If you have that numerical scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4 would be the middle of the road approach. So you're saying the same thing, but just in a different way. And an unbalanced rating scale, again, you're satisfied, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, very satisfied or dissatisfied. So I've never seen one like this, but again, I mean, it's the same as a standard Likert scale, but they're just asking things in a different way. A forced choice rating scale, you have a fixed alternative scale that requires respondents to choose one of the fixed alternatives. Do you like Ford or Chevy or GM? A non-forced choice scale is a fixed alternative rating scale that provides a no opinion category, or that allows you to indicate that you can't say which alternative is their choice. Now again, some of the factors affecting the choice of a single measure or an index measure is the complexity of the issue, the number of dimensions the issue contains. So if you're going to be very in-depth, you might want to use something that gives you more flexibility in the responses. Whether individual attributes of the stimulus are part of a holistic attitude or seen as separate items. For instance, a holistic attitude would be like an index You're looking at different things as a indicator of one thing, and then you can see them as separate things also. And the researcher's conceptual or problem definition will be helpful in making this choice. Well, today we took a look at some of the basics of what we call attitudes. As you can see, they're very complex, and there's many ways that you can measure things like attitudes with the Likert scales and the monadic and comparative scales that you've seen. There are a lot of options that you have out there to help you assess the attitudes and some of the other constructs that your employees or ministers may be experiencing. Well, that's all we have for today. Have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.